Love, Death, and Nuclear Annihilation. A 2C-B trip report sent in by a subscriber. To kick this one off, I guess I'll start with a bit of context. I'm a 20-year-old male from Australia with a fair amount of prior psychedelic experience, having tripped a total of 20 times or so, and having done DMT prior to this experience. However, this was only my second breakthrough experience after DMT, which lacked the depth and profound existential meaning of this trip. To set the scene, this took place at a bush doof, which is essentially Australian slang for a festival in the bush, which is heavily centred around psychedelic and hippie culture. This particular bush doof took place in a rural farmland area, in a more southern part of the country where it gets particularly cold. After setting up our campsite, 4 of our friends and I all dropped our drugs for the night about 8 PM. 3 of us, one of my very close mates and his girlfriend and I, all took 36 milligrams of 2C-B. Yes, only 36 milligrams, and I'm aware it is highly unusual to have such a trip on this kind of dose. We consumed it in the form of powder containing pills. After a very short amount of time, I began to feel the effects, the standard stuff which I won't bother describing. After about an hour or so, the effects became unusually intense and disorientating. Being my first time taking 2C-B, I was unsure if this was typical or just me. Something was off about this trip from the very beginning, perhaps the combination of a new environment, as well as it being very dark and cold and it being my first experience with 2C-B. Regardless, I decided to take a Xanax in a feeble attempt to end the trip. After letting some time pass and talking to my mates about life and other various topics, everything seemed to be okay, as I took my attention away from the way I was feeling. However, I began to ponder about the human race, how we could better organise our society, discussing with my friends as I went. We need to stay warm, but we also need fuel to create heat. But we need to love each other, and to love each other, we need to be all in one place, etc, etc. Suddenly, this line of thought led to a sudden realisation. To this day, I'm not 100% sure what that was, but it was something along the lines of society will never be perfect, and it's the constant progression and problem solving, which is essential to the beauty of the human experience, and realising the only way to be perfect was to die. This final thought shattered my reality. What I was seeing, hearing and feeling appeared to be some kind of complex illusion. Everything spiralled into a nightmarish reality. I'd lost all sense of positioning in 3D time and space. I was no longer aware of my body. My ego reacted to this in a very sudden and explosive way. I stood up inside the tent, crashing into the fabric and stumbling out into the dirt and grass. My distressed friends were calling my name, telling me I was okay and that I just needed to relax. It's around this point that my memory becomes foggy, so some of this comes from other people's accounts. I began to roll around on the grass, screaming as loud as I could, asking to die, asking if anyone had a knife or a firearm. My only interest at that point was to die and escape the illusion and horror of reality that I perceived. Various other bystanders gathered around me and held me down with all their might, telling me, "You're okay buddy, you're gonna be okay, it's just a bad trip." I began telling my friends and the bystanders I had to kill myself, and them too, so that we could all escape to the other side. My thoughts were racing. I was convinced I was killing somebody to prevent them from killing me. For a bit of context here, I've had no prior issues of suicide or mental health, so this appeared to stem purely from what I was experiencing at that very moment. At this point in the trip, I'd left behind my body and the reality it existed in. I remembered seeing my dead body on the ground from an outside perspective. Bystanders gathered around my lifeless body looking down. Holy fuck, I fucking died, I thought to myself. What about my family? My friends? I had so much left to do in my life. I was fully convinced I'd overdosed on 2C-B. I remember the experience of dying and leaving my body was excruciatingly painful. I was screaming, "What the fuck?" over and over. My voice was cracking as I was screaming. I was ripped from my body, but just like that, it was over and I was free. I'd been liberated. Before reaching the paradise at the end of the tunnel, I was catapulted through space and time, witnessing various scenes from around the world. One minute I was in Paris, in the back of a French ambulance, gazing across the skyline towards the Eiffel Tower. The next, I was in a tent in Afghanistan, some sort of militia fighter clutched an AK-47 and looked down at me with a sort of loving concern. He only spoke a sort of gibberish I could not understand. He spoke meaningless words as he puffed on a joint. I looked into his eyes and his face started changing, dynamically morphing between every race, revealing the undeniable love and unity of the collective consciousness that is the human race. I could hear military radio chatter in the background as army helicopters and fighter jets could be seen streaking across the skies above. I did not have much time to ponder these random events and experiences, as my soul went to an alternate parallel dimension, a sort of afterlife. On the other side was paradise, infinite drugs, sex and partying. It took the form of the greatest and most epic bush festival of all time. Everybody who had ever died was living out an eternal reality of bliss. This bush festival dimension even had its own paramedics, who quickly revived me with a tank of nitrous oxide, comforting me after my excruciating separation from the physical world. I jumped off the ground and wasted no time in introducing myself. My name is blank, and I fucking love everyone. I walked around and greeted everyone as they greeted me back. In this realm, love was an undeniable state, free of all ego. I loved everybody, and everybody loved me back. My friends were there too. They had died as well, and their dog came over and licked my face. Some amount of time passed as I revelled in this paradise before returning to a sort of semi-reality where I perceived myself as being back on Earth. That is to say, I was once again experiencing reality but with a hallucinated overlay. At this point, I was inside a care teepee at the bush doof that the organisers had set up to look after those that are tripping way too hard. I don't remember how or when I got there, but I guess that isn't important. All my friends were around me, inhaling nitrous oxide and having a great time. Suddenly, I became aware of a terrible feeling through a collective being greater than myself. The world was ending. I was simultaneously experiencing this as myself and from the perspective of the collective consciousness that is life on Earth. I later found out that this is referred to as Gaia. All around the Earth, nuclear war broke out. I could see ballistic missiles streaking across the sky. Fighter jets streaked overhead, dropping nuclear bombs. I remember being directly hit by several nuclear warheads. A blinding, all-encompassing, synergistic wave of explosive energy washed over me, reducing my physical form to atoms, and once again, only leaving my soul behind. All around me, the material world was disintegrated, as only the souls of me and the other festival goers were left behind. The emotion of everything you ever know, including yourself being annihilated in front of you, was indescribable. It was truly mortifying. However, all those around me did not seem to care. They carried on laughing, loving, and smoking as if none of this was even happening. I slipped back into some kind of alternate dimension, and a prism-like shape with seemingly infinite dimensions formed around me. I could see all the released souls from the nuclear war float around the outside of the prism. I got a feeling that somehow this was meant to happen, and it was caused by me. I was the one who had started all life and destroyed all life. Everyone was me, and I was everyone. I guess the word for that would be God. I was God. We are all God. I vaguely remember perceiving highly sophisticated mathematics behind all existence. Everything I was perceiving, and some sort of ultimate equation, which held every answer any human has asked. The glowing light at the centre of the universe. I had access to every experience of every being that ever lived from the past, future and present time. It was all one, and was only ever an illusion. At this point, my memory cuts off. I suddenly remember being back in my body. My mind had discarded all of these memories immediately after this experience, as if it was too much to handle then and there. The next day, the memories came flooding back, as if it was some crazy dream. It felt so distant and alien, as if it had never happened, but deep down, I know this was more than just some trip. These lessons are what all religions have pointed to. As soon as it clicked, I could see the truth of these lessons in everything. I am honestly deeply thankful that I was able to grow from this trip. I'm frankly surprised I did not get schizophrenia. Thanks for listening. Live long and prosper, my fellow brothers and sisters.